esfuerzo que ha sido para los dos, puedo hablar por Richard también, una enorme felicidad trabajar juntos. Entonces, queríamos mostrarles qué ha hecho Richard, qué hemos hecho, en qué estamos pensando, y ya después ver el edificio. Your turn.
First of all, I want to thank, of course, the client for bringing us here, and then also for the generosity of Mexico and its culture that has influenced us deeply. I believe strongly in teamwork. Architects can no longer design on their own. All that Ricardo, my good friend, has said, I agree and more. So I won't repeat it. I will go straight to my presentation. Do you want to stop it? I will talk, now let me just see, about the sustainable city, the only sustainable form being a compact, well-connected, live-work city. But I will also talk about our language. I say our language, the language it may be, but it's a language which my practice has developed over 40 or 50 years. And especially now, where we have slightly changed the nature of the practice, and it's now called Rogers, Stirk, Harbour and Partners. Let me just see. Am I going backwards? Yes. Right. But again, thank you, BBVA and Bancomer, for giving us this chance. Starting with cities, and the most important part of cities, which is the public domain. I am a passionate believer in cities. Out of cities has come all the great culture and all the major economies. Really, cities are for the meeting of people and for the exchange of ideas. I put this image here of the Centre Pompidou, or Beaubourg, which shows the concept of people meeting people. The Pompidou is very much about creating a place for enjoyment, not just a museum, but a cultural center which would draw all people to it. And it is this public domain that interests me most. Of course, we have to do both, to work on both the public domain, which is filled by passerbys if you're talking about design of buildings, as well as the use of those buildings. In the terms of principles, the most important principle that faces mankind, of course, is climate change. And I have to say, I believe that we will never see the world as it was only a few years ago. We have gone beyond the tipping point, and our children and our grandchildren will suffer from what we're doing. So we, as a society, we as architects, have a direct responsibility to try to improve the environment. And the architects have a special responsibility because they deal with something like 75% of the CO2 that comes into the environment through cities, transport, and all elements related to that. 3 images about cities which have serious problems with them. Of course, Mexico City on your right, no, left, sorry, depends which one you're looking. Which, whilst in the center, has a very clear structure, continues to sprawl at great speed. Which brings me back yet again to the concept of the compact city, the city which is contained and which uses the ground within the city, the derelict ground in the city, and the low density areas to densify around transport hubs. This is typical of many cities, and it's interesting to see changes in many cities in recognition of a general philosophy about the design of cities. And this includes here, I had an interesting discussion with the mayor only this morning about ways forward. The next is a piece of London in the suburbs where the heart of the city is actually a vacuum. We need to intensify in that. And the third one is a piece of Manchester where about 1 house in 4 people is actually lived in. The other 3 are derelict. In the sustainable city, you have to repair the fabric of that city. As I've said, the principles I will be talking about are the principles behind the compact city. The point I want to make that only the compact city is sustainable. Somebody living in a very good environmental house, a real ecological house that lives outside the city, uses 2 to 3 times as much energy as an old house in the city. This is a study that's been made in many countries. So in sustainable forms, and also in the terms of meeting of people, the compact city is the only way forward. So number 1, use derelict land first. Secondly, connect the parts of the city, primarily by using public transport, even better, walking and cycling, encouraging that type of movement. Multifunctional, live, work, leisure, socially inclusive, mixed, poor and rich, no ghettos. One of the serious problems in all cities is the way we're slowly ghettoizing cities, with there are areas you can no longer go in because they're rich and they're guarded, or because the poor we are too frightened to enter into. Socially inclusive, which is this question of living together. Environmentally responsible, I have already mentioned. And of course, supportive of good design. This is an anatomy, a study of the anatomy of a city. One diagram is purely a diagram. The other one is actually applied to Manchester, the second largest city in England. And what it basically says is that cities are made of districts. And districts have to have a good transport hub. They have, and each scale of the city, from the city itself to the district, to the neighborhood, to the small cluster, each has to have a certain identity. It's very much like the study of a body. These are the cells that make up the tissues that make up the body. Talking briefly about London, the city I've lived in for 70 years, and the city that I have worked with, where I have for a long time been the chief advisor to the Mayor of London and also to the British government on cities and architecture. It's a wonderful city. It has changed for the better in the last 10 to 15 years. And one needs to look at what principles are making it better.